Hi, I'm Annabelle, and I am an indie author, self-published on Amazon. My debut book that I just published is Catterton. It is a novel for tweens and up. It's about a story of little anthro cats living in like a fantasy, steampunk-esque Victorian world. It has a lot of queer rep and disability rep, and a lot of topics that I care deeply about while still being a whimsical story, like Ghibli films, old Disney, and a lot of older style children's stories that were maybe a bit darker, like 90s animation. And I've been working on it for years. I've really tried to polish it and make it a product worth publishing. And I'm very proud of Catterton, and I would love for it to be a trilogy. This was how I plotted my indie published trilogy. This video is not necessarily about the pros and cons of self-publishing versus traditional publishing. I chose to indie publish for a few different reasons. I came very close to getting a literary agent for traditional publishing. That is why my first book is very much formatted like a traditional novel, which I'll get into in just a moment. But I also plan to make a video about self-publishing versus traditional publishing as someone who has studied the publishing industry for a very long time and has queried with some success for a very long time. Unfortunately, both publishing markets are very oversaturated, so it honestly, in my opinion, is going to come down to the type of book you want to create. And either way, you should be striving to make a very polished product. And during the process of plotting this trilogy of mine, I've cared very deeply about making it a high-quality product and not just an entertaining story. I've attended a lot of writing classes in the meantime, and I've been working on my craft for several years. And I have been told that this book I have just published is very well written, both by professors and by some readers who have already given their feedback, which makes me super happy. The first Catterton book, when I said it's formatted like a traditionally published novel, what I meant to say was it is like a standalone with series potential. This is going to be very important if you want to pursue traditional publishing. A standalone with series potential means that the story wraps up in a satisfying way, but there's potential for more story. A lot of authors who are planning a trilogy, they want to end the first book on some sort of cliffhanger. If you are trying to become a debut author in the traditional publishing industry, you're likely going to have a slightly harder time getting picked up by an agent, just because agents are a bit cautious of that. Not that trilogies don't sell for first-time authors in the traditional publishing industry, but it is a little bit more rare. Now, if you want to pursue self-publishing, like me, and you're doing your own marketing and everything, you have a bit more freedom, but even then, I would still think critically about making sure your first book wraps up in a meaningful way. And this is going to look different across different genres. Technically, Catterton is children's fiction, but it is meant for tweens and up, and I wanted it to be consumable for adults or older kids who still like fairy tale-like dark stories. And so I tried to format my books similarly to how a movie would be, where most movies don't really end on a cliffhanger. So at the end of the day, the first Catterton book, which is out now, does wrap up nicely, but there is series potential. And again, this was because I initially wanted it to be traditionally published. That didn't quite work out because my book is in an awkward middle area between middle grade and young adult fiction. If you don't know what that means, middle grade is supposed to be for like ages 8 to 12, and young adult fiction is 14 to 17. I think Catterton is the perfect tween book. And a lot of literary agents, even though they said it was well written, they had a slight problem with that because it made them uncomfortable that the main character was obviously an older teenager. If you don't know, traditional publishing is very, very fussy about your age range, and usually the age of your character needs to perfectly match up with the audience for your story. I didn't want to do that because, you know, this is an anthro cat novel. It's supposed to be a bit whimsical, and so I thought I could get away with it, but literary agents told me that even though it was lovely, they didn't like that the character for this middle grade novel was a bit older, and they also did not like that it was about anthro cats because they thought that kids nowadays don't like anthro animals anymore. I know that's not true because, like, I'm on the internet and furries still love those old 90s animated movies. I totally know that there's an audience for Catterton, but I understand that it might be a hard sell for the traditional publishing market, and that is why at the end of the day I decided to self-publish on KPD, aka Amazon. Again, this video is not in depth about that, but that is just my quick thoughts as to why I wanted to self-publish. Now, for planning the rest of the trilogy. When I first wrote Catterton years ago, I did have plans for what a series could look like, But over the course of editing Catterton, the first novel, completely rewriting it, doing huge developmental edits that spanned over the course of years, and then of course my more minute edits and my line edits, my initial plan for the series has shifted dramatically. Catterton is not super long. It's like shorter than the first Harry Potter novel, but it's on the longer side, and so there needs to be a lot of content in each book. The way I like to plan series, or at least what I've just discovered, is I love for each book to have a very specific focus. Yes, it's about the same characters, it's about the same world, but I like the idea of there being a focus for each novel. Now, what do I mean by focus? Well, my first Catterton book follows Elsie, my main character, and she explores her world, Catterton, kind of for the first time. It takes place in London after humans disappear, and cats become very sentient and develop their own intelligent world out of the ruins of London, which is now closed off and called Catterton. It is a kingdom, or a queendom, should I say. And so this first book is an introduction into this world, and I have to understand that the reader is not familiar with my world yet. So the first book is very much establishing the logistics of Catterton, the rules, the way these cats live, which I also establish in my own illustrations because I am an author artist. I did my own cover design, and I have black and white illustrations throughout, which I'm very proud of, by the way. Really, my first book is very character-focused. I want people to be attached to these characters and feel very deeply for them. There's one main big bad, the Ratking. And while there are twists and turns, I want it to be understandable for a tween, so they can become attached to my world. Now that I've completed the first book and I've really established the tone of the series, I have left open ends to create more books. Now, if you stop at this first book and this is all you read, you won't die or anything. I did want it to be readable by itself, which in the end, that's going to be a choice you make as the author. But I'm exploring these open ends in the next two books. I want the focus of the next two books to be more psychological, even more about their society and how their society is unfair, which is talked about in the first book, but it's not the main focus. I've established classism, but for my second book, I want the second book to be very focused on the pollution of their world, and that is partly the conflict. I think this would be a hard conflict to sell for a first book. But once you already like this world, you might be concerned about this pollution and how it negatively affects characters you already care about, as well as how the psyches of these characters are developing. The thematic focus of the first Catterton book was very much about family, which helps you connect with these new characters, and then the second book is going to be very, very focused on pollution and how their society is constructed in an unfair, classist way. Now, when I say that each book has a thematic focus, and I think that really helps you write in like a consistent way where, the books all feel like they're part of one series, but each book also feels distinct, that doesn't mean that these themes are just in that one book. It's going to spread throughout the entire series. But I really like the idea of series having a specific theme focused in each book, especially if it's like a fantasy-esque world and it's very fairy tale-like. I like there being a theme for kids that can be expanded upon. So really your standalone should be about getting these characters to connect with the reader, and they're going to have their own struggles in this first book. And then in future books, once you've already established a trust and a connection with the reader, you maybe can explore themes that would be a harder sell for a first book of a series. You can explore ideas that maybe wouldn't be interesting all by itself. I don't think most kids would want to read a book about pollution, but if my kids or, tweens and up really like these cat characters and they really liked the whimsy of the first book and they care about the world now, if the second book is about, wow, their world is getting really polluted, the river Thames, their food supply, it's poisoned now, what are these characters going to do? There's going to be a deeper struggle about food scarcity and how the rich will villainize the poor. That might be a little tough for younger readers to understand the first time around, but they already really like these characters and they really want to follow these characters, then it might be something I could explore in a second book. I would love the third book to be about these characters middle-aged. Now, this would probably really not work for a traditionally published novel. I don't think most traditionally published series would have children's book characters. Again, it's for tweens and up, but it's still classified under children's. I don't think they would have a book about these characters being middle-aged, but because my characters are cats and there's an inherent whimsy and children's book-esque fairy tale element to that, I can get away with that. So that is something you have to think about. And of course, if you're writing adult fiction, you can probably do whatever you want, but you always want to keep your audience in mind as to how these books develop. But if your books are successful, you might be awarded more exceptions. I hate to use Harry Potter as an example again because I don't think the author is a good person, but her books were very successful, so yeah, she can have the future books be about the characters older. She's allowed to do that. And if you are self-published, you're not going to be having a publisher giving you rules, so that is just something you have to think critically about. Are the characters' ages appropriate for what I am writing? Is the way the series is developing appropriate for my genre? And of course, what is really going to help you is reading a lot. Do not write if you don't read. That's very silly, especially if you want to be traditionally published, because the traditionally published industry really requires you to have a knowledge of the current market. That doesn't mean you should just write what you think is going to sell, because a lot of times that is not going to work out well for you. The traditionally published industry is very fast moving, so you don't want to write trends, but you do want to have an understanding of the way books are formatted and what books sell. And again, more exceptions are going to be awarded for successful books and for self-published books. There's always going to be exceptions, but it's good to see the average. How is the average series formatted? How many books are in the average series? A trilogy is nice because it's readable in like a week, assuming the books aren't too big. A reader can get through that fairly quickly. A series with a lot of books, a reader might be hesitant to start, but again, this matters based on your genre and what is normal in your genre. You should be reading in your genre and outside of your genre. You need to have an understanding of what is currently selling. Otherwise, I do not think you are setting yourself up for success, even if you are a wonderful writer who has really honed their craft. I think part of honing your craft is understanding the artistry of what you do, as well as understanding that at the end of the day, it is a product. If you are trying to sell your books, they are a product. They need to be edited. They need to be formatted well. They need to be planned well and plotted well. As far as what I do to literally plot, this is going to be different for every author and probably going to be different for every writing project you do. I know I only have one book published, but I've done a lot of writing projects over the course of many years that I plan to publish one day. And my process for planning each one looks different for each one. The easiest way is opening a Google Doc and doing a bunch of bullet points and typing random stuff on the page. It is nice to write out your thoughts. You think you're not going to forget your plans, but when you are writing a lot, you might forget elements of your story. That is perfectly normal. No writer remembers every single little thing they plot and write, so I don't recommend keeping it all in your head, especially if you're writing a long series with complicated world building. It is highly recommended, in my opinion, that you be physically typing out or writing your plans for each book. Bullet points are super easy. Getting a journal is really fun. As an artist, I also use sketching to plan. I already have illustrations made for future books, for plot points of future books, and having that illustration does help me. Those are my general thoughts in how I formatted the Catterton series, and my thoughts might develop and change as I actually physically write the next two books. I have written most of the second one, and I've plotted most of the third one, but I'm sure that my style of plotting is going to change for each book series. That's why I'm not really recommending a set way you should plot. I love using themes to separate books, as I've said, but different writers might have a different way of viewing their different books in your mind. You're going to be doing it in a different way. People argue about the right way to write. Honestly, in my opinion, as long as you get it on the page and you are editing it in a way that makes it look like a professional product, at the end of the day, what matters is the professional product you end up with, and the fact that you created a piece of art that you're really proud of. Especially if you're pursuing self-publishing, I would really focus on editing. Don't just plop a bunch of junk onto Amazon just because a traditional publisher doesn't pick it up. I would carefully think about whether or not your series or your book is actually fit for self-publishing. Not just a traditional publisher didn't want me, so I'm going to plop it onto Amazon, even though I've been told it's not very good. Let's think critically about it. So yeah, if you're interested in Catterton because you like very fantasy, fairy tale-esque stories with queer and disability rep, there you go. Or even if you just wanted to hear my thoughts as a newly indie published debut author who has done a lot of writing classes, and I have won my fair share of, albeit small, awards, but hopefully I can get more for Catterton. So check me out on Goodreads. I also do a lot of art and fandom content on my other social media platforms like cosplay, editing. I really like Star Wars. I don't know if you could tell. I hope you didn't mind Kylo being a little guest star in the video. I don't know what to put right here. My room is still a mess. I'm still reorganizing it, so I hope you enjoyed staring at my little trinkets in the background while I yapped. So yeah, I am a new-ish content creator. If you liked this video, please boost my content. Check out my other content. Like, share, and subscribe or whatever, and help me reach more writers that I can connect with, or readers. Writing is more accessible now than ever, but it also means that I think a lot of people aren't, putting the proper work into making their art polished and good and worthy of reading. Now, if you're just doing it for fun, that's one thing, but if you want it to be sold, I think it needs to really be a process and something you seriously edit and think about. So those are my thoughts on how I'm plotting Catterton as a series. Check out Catterton and check out my other videos. Thank you so much, and good luck with your writing, and thank you for staying for the whole video. I appreciate it. Bye.